It took months before anyone ever even explained to me what an intrusive thought was. And I, by that point, had had so many of them that I started to believe that these were my thoughts and that I was this crazy person. And I didn't feel like I could tell anyone what I was struggling through because I felt like they might take my daughter away and probably my other two children too. They'd be like, this lady, she is not fit to be a mother. And so I really didn't feel like I could tell anyone.
Welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast, where we discuss all things identity, self-compassion, and fulfillment within and beyond motherhood. I'm Emily Rose Hardy, a mindset and self-love coach for moms. I am a firm believer that to be able to take care of our children, we must take care of ourselves first. This is not a parenting podcast. No, this is a podcast where we will challenge the societal expectations of what it means to be a mom, demystify the perfect mom myth, and learn to love ourselves. You are worthy, mama. Let's do this. Hello, and welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast. If you are listening to this on the day of release for this episode, it is World Mental Health Day, and I'm just so grateful to be alive and working in a time when conversations about mental health are coming more into the mainstream. And in this episode, we are going to be zooming into maternal mental health. There is so much power in sharing our stories and relating to and supporting one another. So that is exactly what we are going to be doing here today. And I am so happy to introduce you to today's guest, Arielle Wozniak. I've had the honor of hearing her story and about the work that she does to support mothers. And I'm so grateful to be able to share all that she has to bring to us today with you. Arielle is a 2-time postpartum depression survivor and mental health coach for moms. She helps moms overcome depression and anxiety without medication. She is dedicated to guiding moms in their journey of finding peace, joy, and fulfillment amidst the challenges of motherhood. Arielle, welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast. I am so happy to have you here today. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Emily. I am honored to be here. So I've kind of gone back and forth with what my title is, but essentially it's a mental health coach for moms. I focus a lot on helping moms to build practices and habits that are going to benefit their mental health. So it's a really rewarding job that I get to do every day because I'm really getting to see women who are kind of in the depths of despair and walk with them through the journey of healing. So this is now about, I was just calculating earlier, I think it's like year 4.5 or something, somewhere around there. When we get back up to like April, then that'll be 5 years. So whatever that lands on. But I've had the opportunity to walk with so many women throughout their postpartum mental health journey. And then I've had even some clients that I get to work with even beyond that. And so really my work is just to help you have the best mental health. And that has to do with so many different components of your life. It's not just like we're thinking, oh, I just have to focus on my mental health. But really, there are so many different things that we focus on. It's a wheel of wellness, is what I call it. And so we look at this wheel, we look at all these different components of your life, and how can we just make like a 1% increase in one of those areas? And what you find is that when you focus on one, so many of those other things start to line up as well. So that's kind of like the very short story of what I do. I usually go super in depth, but I won't go into all the details, but that's kind of what I get to do every day.
Well, I definitely want to hear more about what you do as a mental health coach, because I know that, we think of therapists as the support for mental health. So I know there's some differentiation there. So we will definitely get to that in this episode. But I really want to start off by asking you about your own personal story on mental health in motherhood, because I know that is such a huge part of the work that you do. So could you tell us about that?
Yeah. So this is the long story. So I would say that pretty much like growing up, I really had no struggles with mental health. I was a really confident person. I never struggled with anxiety, depression. I honestly didn't truly believe that they existed. And I always talk about my friend who's been my best friend since like 7th grade now. And she struggled with anxiety when we were growing up. And I often just thought, like, just snap out of it. Like, what's the big deal? I truly did not understand it. until I experienced it myself. And I was like, oh, this is actually a thing. And so, me being the individual that I was, super like confident, really career oriented, very driven and motivated, I had like this big plan for my life. So, my goal was that I was going to become a plastic surgeon. I pretty much knew from like kindergarten that I was going to be a doctor. I remember being in kindergarten and the teachers like asking us, what do you want to be when you grow up? And like everyone says, a doctor, a firefighter, all those typical things. But I hung on to that dream of being a doctor for many, many years. So that took me all throughout elementary school, middle school, high school, up to college. I went to school of pre med. And then I got to college and I was like, this is a lot harder than I thought it would be. So I actually transitioned and pivoted into a different career path. I graduated from school with a degree in communications and marketing. And so the new vision became that I was going to live in New York City in like a high rise. I was going to be the super like corporate CEO, like top of the ladder person. I had no vision of getting married, no dreams of having children. Like I was the total opposite, I would say, of most like girls growing up, where they're thinking of, like when they get married or when they have a kid and like all those things. It just, that did not set me on fire. I wasn't passionate about it. I was like, I have to be successful. That's what my dream is in life. And so fast forward to college, I'm in my senior year and I meet my now husband, which again, I said I wasn't planning to get married, but here we are. So I meet my now husband. We dated for like 3 months and then we got engaged. Again, everyone looking at me is like, what in the world? This is so far from the Arielle that we know. So we get engaged. Several months after that, we found out we were pregnant and then got married. It was not a part of anyone's plan. Like at that point, we got engaged before we found out we were pregnant. And then we're like, let's rush this wedding because we're going to be moving across the country to be closer to my mom. And so we moved from Connecticut to Georgia, and it was a whirlwind of all the things. So if you think about it, I had the vision for corporate success. That felt like it was out the window. I had a vision for no children. I'm now pregnant with my first child. I had no vision for getting married. I'm now married, and I'm moving halfway across the country, or at least it felt like halfway across the country for me. It's like a 16-hour drive. So it was extremely far. And so my world literally was turned upside down, and everything that I had known and worked towards was completely gone. And so I went through this period of like, who am I? What am I doing? What is life? Like, it was just this really painful period to go through. So when I got here to Georgia, I ended up seeing a psychologist, and it was not anything great. She like showed me some pictures and she's like, what do you see here? Like the classical psychologist that you would think of. And I'm like, I don't know. What am I supposed to see? And so I thought, like, that doesn't work. That's not going to be helpful to me. But my mom is a therapist, and she was like, well, let's try out a therapist instead of a psychologist, see how that works for you. So I ended up seeing a therapist. That also wasn't super helpful. And it's not because therapists aren't helpful, but it was because I wasn't ready to voice all the things that I was struggling through. And so I was more of like, I'll just show up, just to say I did the thing and tried, but I'm not actually putting forth the effort. And so my therapy sessions were pretty one sided. The therapist was talking at me and asking questions. And I pretty much was like, yes, no, I don't know, the whole time for 45 minutes, week after week. So, not really making any improvements. And in fact, once I had my son, I started to really spiral because I felt like I had lost everything. Like I had no more freedom. I was out of work for a while because I had a C-section. It was just, everything was so different from what I thought my life would be. And so I was still seeing the therapist, and she was like, I really want you to see the psychiatrist. And so I started seeing the psychiatrist. I worked with her for about a year. We tried all different sorts of medications and different things. And we get to the end of this year, and she sits me down and she's like, okay, I just want to have this heart to heart conversation with you. Mind you, psychiatry appointments are usually like 10, 15 minutes and you're out the door. But she took the time to actually be there and be present with me. And she was like, we've tried a lot of different things for a year, and I haven't seen any improvement. Usually by this time, like we're seeing something, we know that something's working and we can try to go a little bit deeper in that, but I'm really not seeing any improvement for you. Do you mind if I pray with you? And at that time, if you would have asked me if I believe in God, I would have said, yeah, like I do. But I wasn't like I didn't go to church. I wasn't like reading a Bible, praying. None of those things were like important in my life at that moment. And so when she asked me, I was just like, sure. I mean, if you think that'll work, then you pray. And so she did. And I always say that wasn't like the moment that I was like miraculously healed and everything was rainbows, butterflies. That's not what happened. But in that moment, I really felt like it was like breaking off of me. All of the stress and the anxiety and the depression and everything was starting to come off. And I had a really good cry. I'm not a crier, or at least I didn't used to think I was a crier. I have become one through becoming a mom. But through that experience, she invited me to her church. The short version of it is that my mom got invited to the same church. We ended up visiting that church, and that became my home church. I still go there to this day. I really got into community there, and everything was going really well. So well that I had like long forgotten what it was like to go through postpartum depression and like, let's have another baby. That sounds like an amazing idea. And so we did. Thankfully, the second time I did not experience postpartum depression. But when I look back on my story, I think the reason why is because I was in control of that
Mm-hmm.
situation. I had a scheduled C-section because my first ended in a failed induction, and that ended up in a C-section because his heart rate was starting to decrease too much and it just wasn't safe. And so the second time, my doctor said, we're just going to go straight into a C-section. I don't do any vaginal births after a C-section, so we're scheduling it. I knew exactly the day. I knew exactly the time. It was like the planner in me was so excited for this. I knew all of the information I wanted to have. I worked up until the Friday before he was born. He was born on a Tuesday. It was great. Like I just had everything in the place that I wanted it to be. And so I had no postpartum depression after that. So I continue on my life and everything's going really well. We now have two boys. They're 2 years apart. And I had wanted a girl so badly. And so I was like, let's just try one more time, see if we can get this girl. And if not, then I'm destined to forever be a boy mom. And that's okay. And so we ended up trying, and I got really like, just really laser focused on this happening. So much so that I joined trying to conceive groups, which I had never joined one of those before, like, and I conceived just fine the first two times. But I joined these groups. I started to take my temperature every day. I started to like look at cervical mucus, and like I wanted to know all the information so that I could have exactly the right time and set up everything exactly as it's supposed to be. So it became this like obsession for me. And so once I actually was pregnant, my brain is like, well, now we have to move on to something else. Now what are we obsessing about? And then it became her gender. And so I was super, super focused on this has to be a girl. And so I took multiple different types of tests that will tell you what the gender is of your child. I took one that you're not supposed to take until like 9 or 10 weeks. I took it at like 8 weeks because I was too impatient. After I took that test, I didn't believe it. So I took another one a couple of weeks later. After I took that test, I still didn't believe it. So I got an elective ultrasound. After that, I still didn't believe it. So when we went to the anatomy scan, I was like, what am I having? And my husband was like, we already know that we're having a girl. But my brain was just like, no, we don't. And so once I got the results then that you are having a girl, I was like, okay, I can believe that. And then my brain moved on to something else that we can become hyper focused and obsessed on. And it became my heart rate and my blood pressure. And so I had a blood pressure cuff, which, mind you, I've never had any issues with my blood pressure, but I had a blood pressure cuff that I was constantly using, borrowed that from my mom. I was always checking my heart rate. If any like little sensation was off in my body, it was like an alarm was sounding. And so it just became this really like anxious period in my life. And it was unlike anything I had experienced before because I really didn't struggle with anxiety. Yes, I was impatient, but anxiety wasn't something that was like an actual part of my life. And so we get up to the point where we're pretty close to it's time to have her. And I just couldn't wait any longer. And so I called up my doctor. I spoke with the midwife and was like, hey, can I try out this midwife's brew? I've heard about it on the internet. Supposedly it induces labor. Can I try it? And for whatever reason, this time I had decided I wanted to try for a natural birth. So I had actually switched doctors at this point. I didn't want to do the C-section. I was like, this is my final chance to experience it. And so I had a different doctor, and the midwife was like, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you want to try it, you can. Like, it's not going to harm you or your baby. So you can try it if you want to, but I would not recommend it. That was all I needed to hear. I'm going to try it. And so I tried it out, and pretty soon after I started to have contractions. It was really, really miserable. I don't remember any of like the trips to the hospital. It was just like everything was a blur. And while I was in labor, I ended up having my very first panic attack. I didn't know what it was. I thought I was dying. It was like, what is this? And I remember saying that to the nurse, and she was just like, well, I think you're a little bit anxious. And I'm like, no, I think I'm actually dying. Like, if you've ever had a panic attack, it really, truly feels like you're dying. And so after that, my nurse, I don't know why she told me this, but after I actually delivered my daughter, she told me that I lost a lot of blood and that most doctors would have done a transfusion. My doctor decided not to, and she's not sure why he decided not to. So then my brain is on, okay, I've lost too much blood, and that's what's happening here. Like, I'm clearly dying. And then my daughter fails 3 different hearing tests. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, she's deaf and I'm dying. My world is absolutely falling apart. And then they send me home. And so I get to go home with all these issues now. And I have 7 days of like 10 hours of sleep total. So over the course of the first week that she's alive, I slept for about 10 hours. And it was just a miserable existence. Like, I truly did not know how I would go on from one moment to the next moment. Thankfully, I had a huge support system. All of my friends would come over, they would pray with me, people were bringing me food. It was just like, it was a huge relief to know that I had people there to support me, but it still didn't take away the pain that I was going through and the struggle that I was going through. And so, kind of to make the story shorter, which I said in the beginning, it's a long story, but I started going to therapy. The therapist was like, I really just think you need to exercise some patience, and that's going to help you through this time. And I said, no, 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 that's not what I need. I need a solution now. So I decided to check myself into a psychiatric hospital. 10 out of 10, do not recommend. It was the worst place that I could have gone. But through that experience, I was given like this vision for the lack that we have in just postpartum mental health. And that set a fire within me to become the resource that I was looking for. And so now I get to be that person for other moms who are in that place of like, I've seen a therapist, I've seen a psychiatrist, I don't know what to do. Like, it's not working. And I get to walk with them through that process. And so it really is looking at all the things that you're doing, pulling all of that together. And oftentimes we're doing more than we need to. And we're trying out so many different things versus just trying one road, continuing on that one road. And I get to coach them through that and be there like as a guide or a mentor, someone who's been there, who's walked the road and can show you that it does truly get better. Whew. So yes, that's my story. And I missed parts and I'm like, there's no way I'm going back to add in all the details. But yeah, that's me and how I got to be where I am today.
Your story is so powerful because I think it really demonstrates the complexities of mental health when it comes to postpartum mental health in particular, but mental health in general, how there's so many factors to it. And so when we are approaching healing, there's so many factors we have to look at, right? And so I think it just really, I love getting to hear the stories of moms who have dealt with postpartum mental health struggles, because when we bring these conversations forward, it's like, okay, I'm not alone in the anxiety that I felt. And my postpartum anxiety was different than the way it showed up for you, but just hearing little pieces that it's like, I can relate to that. And knowing, okay, I'm not alone in that. I think it's really powerful. And then it's really neat to hear how that has informed then how you actually move forward and support other moms, because you do have this wealth of knowledge and experience from your own experiences in facing, postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety in 2 very different ways, 2 very different points in your life. But seeing that the way that can happen, it's important for us to just be having these conversations.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that it does for me is it highlights that there is no one size fits all. And
Mm-hmm.
so I feel like in the medical community, which I think that medicine is great and such a resource, but within the medical community, there's been this goal of like finding the solution for postpartum depression. And there isn't one solution. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where what I always come back to is that we're all bio individuals. So my body is different than your body. My experiences are different than your experience. Even the first time I went through postpartum depression is very different than the second time I went through it. And so had I tried the things that worked for me, like perfectly the first time, they might not necessarily work for me the second time. And so the goal when I'm working with clients is to respect the fact that they are all so different. Your lived experiences are different than mine. And so I'll oftentimes get women who come to me and just say, like, well, just tell me what to do. Like, what should I do to get over this? I'm like, it's not that simple because you are different than I am. And what worked for me may not necessarily work for you. And so, what we're doing is we're trying out things that are aligned with your value system and the experience that you are currently going through. And then we're picking out the ones that work and the ones that don't work. We can say, okay, here's what we learned from it. And so, it's not like this, oh, I failed process.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that that wasn't what you needed in that moment. And so for me, therapy wasn't what I needed that first time around. It wasn't. But the second time around, I absolutely loved therapy. I thought it was amazing. And so you have to have that respect for yourself to say, yeah, okay, that's what worked for that person, but it might not work for me. And that doesn't mean I'm any more broken than they are. It just means that I'm different than they are, which we all are different. And so if we can get to that point of like, well, there's a different solution for each person and there's a different solution for the time period that you were in your life, then we can get through this a lot quicker versus just trying all the things that worked for me when you're Emily and you're different and you
Mm-hmm.
have a different experience and may not work for you in what you're going through.
It's such an important reminder. Like if there was just one easy solution, then none of us would have to be dealing with this. That's not the case.
Yeah.
And so just what a valuable resource you are as someone who can then support through like let's try the things because really, yeah, I guess like thinking about it, that's not what a therapist does. A therapist is one tool that can be extremely valuable.
Yeah.
Medication is one tool that can be valuable. And there's different pieces that or tools that can be valuable, but you have to figure it out yourself if you're figuring it out yourself. And so that's so beautiful. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more about as a mental health coach, like what you do kind of with your clients in the process of supporting them. What does that look like?
Yeah. So oftentimes I've had people reach out to me like, oh, well, you're a mental health counselor, so I would like to work with you. And I'm like, nope, not a counselor. I am not a therapist. It is very different. There are clear
Mm-hmm.
lines of delineation between what my role is and what a therapist's role is. A therapist is able to talk with you through some of the deep emotions that you're feeling and help you to maybe process some things that you didn't process, or maybe you processed in a way that wasn't helpful for you. That's not at all what I'm doing. So, therapist is looking at what happened in the past. They may look at some of the present and kind of how that gets you maybe to your future. And what my goal is as a coach is to have that focus on the future. And so what
Mm-hmm.
we're looking at is here's where I am presently. It doesn't matter necessarily how I got there. So I don't need to know all of your backstory and every single thing that led to this moment of where you are in time. But I do need to know where you are so that together we can kind of troubleshoot and see where it is that you're going. And so, my very first call with clients, after we do somewhat of a trial session and just make sure that this relationship works for us, our first call is going to be setting the vision for where you're going. And so, I always look at it as like kind of like taking a road trip. So, if you were to take some sort of trip, you would want to know like where it is that you're heading. So where is it that I'm going? And so together we're envisioning what that future looks like. What is your ideal? We often look 5, 10 years down the road. What would that look like to be at Emily's very best? So I'm not just talking about mentally. I want to also know about your physical, what your environment looks like. And we create this really clear picture of where it is that you're heading. And once we know where we're going, we can start to put some steps in place to actually get us there. And so I focus a lot on like small, attainable action. We often think that we have to go 100% into something or it's not good enough. And that could not be farther from the truth. The bigger you go the first time, the easier it is for that habit to fall by the wayside because it's too challenging in the beginning. And so we look at very small thing. So for some of my clients, a small thing is I'm taking a shower 5 days a week. Perfect. Let's do it. That's amazing. For some clients, that might be that I'm working out 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week. Perfect. That's awesome. For one of my clients, it was that I'm doing 5 squats before I get into the shower every day. Awesome. That is so amazing. Everyone is in a different place. And so they're focusing on different things. Some people are focusing on the physical side of that wheel of wellness. For some people, it's that they've lost sight of themselves and their identity and things that they enjoyed. And so sometimes we're doing some exploration. And what is it that I did used to enjoy? Maybe I can find some of those things again. So I have clients who want to listen to music, or I have one client who she listened to podcasts, and that was like a way for like uplifting her. And it was just like a moment of peace for her. And it's such a small thing that we can easily just be like, that's not going to make any difference. But you do that small thing over and over and over for 12 weeks, it makes a huge difference. There's like the analogy of like if a plane was going from, I don't know, like Phoenix to Georgia, and they were off just by 1 degree, they're going to land in a totally different state than they would have originally. And so it's just that 1% change. It's not like we're doing anything crazy and huge. We're doing something really small. And then we start to build off of that. And so if you're the person who started out with the 5 days a week of showers, then maybe after that, you're adding on 3 meals a day. And then once you get to your 3 meals a day, you're making sure that those meals are actually healthy meals. Okay, now we have 3 healthy meals a day. I want to actually increase my water. Okay, now I have my increased water. I'm taking showers every day. I'm eating 3 healthy meals a day. I'm feeling really good. I have so much more energy. Now I want to shift my focus and make sure my baby's getting enough sleep and on a schedule. Okay, great. Now the baby's on a schedule. You're drinking water. You're getting your physical activity in. Like all these things start to add up, and you turn around 12 weeks later and you're like, I am so far from who I was 12 weeks ago. And it started with something small. And so I help them to create that plan, what we call a roadmap, and then I hold them accountable to it. And so we're checking in every single week. And on those weekly calls, we're talking about what worked for you, what didn't work for you, why did that thing work for you? Because oftentimes we'll just say, like, oh, well, fell off the wagon. Okay, but why? Was it too challenging? Did we need a smaller goal? Was there something else that stood in the way? And so we're looking at all those barriers, and we're starting to get crystal clear on what the path forward looks like. And so it really is just a matter of knowing where you're going, taking small steps to get there, and having someone who holds you accountable. That is the work that I get to do every single day. And you would not believe how big of a difference that makes in just 12 weeks in someone's life.
That is awesome. It really is clear how like having that accountability and that like partner in making the decisions, because a lot of times it can feel overwhelming to make any sort of change, even if it's small. And so to know, okay, this is what I've chosen to do. This is the change I've chosen to make. Now I have some accountability. I have some support in getting there. It's amazing what support can do and what just having somebody to kind of call on can bring to you. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had no idea that coaching even existed several years ago. So yeah, that's a part of my mission, is just to educate on what it looks like for you to be coached and what the benefit of it is, and then walking with a woman through the journey. So yeah.
Beautiful. So I know obviously every individual is different. And I know, like, even in your own story, the mental health experiences you had both times that you faced postpartum depression were so different.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if in your own practice, if there's common themes or patterns surrounding motherhood and mental health that you see kind of come up with some regularity.
Yeah, and that's a really, really good question. I think the thing that comes up the most common is something that you kind of touched on earlier, but it's this idea of like, I am so unique in this issue that I'm facing. No one else in the world has ever gone through what I'm going through. And I hear that time and time again from countless women. It's like, well, I feel like no one else has ever gone through this struggle. Like, how can I be sure that I'll actually get through this if no one else has ever experienced this before? And what I usually will say, and I mean this in the most loving way, but you are not that unique in the struggle that you're facing. It is the reality of it. There's so many women who are struggling, so many who are struggling in silence. There are women who I work with, and if you would look at like the highlight reel of their Instagram, you would think like they are thriving in motherhood. But then I speak with them and I'm like, oh, you're not thriving. You're not at that point where you feel like this is like the best life for me. You're actually struggling. But we've gotten to this point where we've gotten so used to covering up what we're going through versus just showing the ugliness of it. And so I think one of the things that I did, it was actually super helpful for me, but it was helpful for other people as well, as I showed while I was in the middle of postpartum depression. I showed days when I just felt like I could not go on. I showed all of it. And that for me was really, it was like my video diary, if you will. But then I had so many people who would reach out to me, even who were beyond what you consider like typical postpartum period, who would say, like, I'm going through that. I've been going through that for 5 years now. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And so if I can help one mom just know that she is not alone in the struggle, I feel like my job is done. And I've gotten the opportunity to do that for so many moms. And I just want people to recognize that like it really isn't that unique of a struggle. It's unfortunate that it feels that way because there's not community, there's not a whole lot of people talking about it. There's more than there were in the past, but we're still at that point where it's a little bit of a taboo topic. But you're not alone. You're not alone. You're not going crazy. That's a really important one. Sometimes we feel like we're going crazy. You're not. My therapist at the time actually told me to stop saying going crazy because she said it was insensitive. But like that was just what my brain was like, I'm going to go crazy. And so if you can just recognize those two truths, like that will be extremely powerful in your life. You're not alone. You're not going crazy.
Yeah, that's so important. I'm
Yeah.
wondering, with conversations about mental health being more in the mainstream than they were, and I know for me, in my own experience dealing with postpartum anxiety, a lot of what allowed me to recognize that what I was going through really was postpartum anxiety, because again, it didn't really fit into the box of the screenings at the doctor's office, was people showing up on social media and sharing their experiences. And I was like, oh my goodness, that is what I'm going through, and just how powerful that is. And I feel so grateful for that. But these conversations are still somewhat taboo, as you said. And it can be hard to address if you don't feel like you have maybe a support system that you're comfortable going to, or you're just maybe feeling shame about your experience, or don't even really know how to put words to what you're experiencing. What would you say to a mom who may be dealing with those mental health challenges, but kind of feels alone in that?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. So, one of the things that I try to do in sharing my journey is share some of the specifics. And I think that's really helpful. Oftentimes, like there are intrusive thoughts, which some people are familiar with what they are, and many aren't. I was not familiar with an intrusive thought until I had one over 5 years ago now. But those intrusive thoughts, they feel very real. They feel like this is my thought, this is what I'm thinking. And so it can feel extremely scary to have those types of thoughts. And so I try to share, hey, like, yeah, an intrusive thought might be, and this is a trigger warning. So if you're someone who is going through an experience right now and you're like, I cannot hear this would be the point to cut it off. But you might have an intrusive thought that, like, what if I drop my baby down the stairs? Or what if I intentionally harm my baby? There was a book that I read at one point, and it talks about this mom who was having intrusive thoughts about putting her baby in the microwave. And so she would never go into the kitchen with her baby because she was so afraid that she would actually act on that intrusive thought. And that's where intrusive thoughts actually get their power, is when you avoid the things that you're having these like thoughts about. And I really had no idea. And so if I had someone tell me like, hey, that thought you're having, that's an intrusive thought. And it's actually, it doesn't mean that you are going to act upon it. If you're afraid of that thought, that's actually a good thing. That would have taken so much weight off of my shoulders from the first time that I had one. But it took months before anyone ever even explained to me what an intrusive thought was. And I, by that point, had so many of them that I started to believe that these were my thoughts and that I was this crazy person. And I didn't feel like I could tell anyone what I was struggling through because I felt like they might take my daughter away, and probably my other two children too. They'd be like, this lady, she is not fit to be a mother. And so I really didn't feel like I could tell anyone. But what I found is that if you speak to women who've gone through the experience, I had a cousin who I had never even talked to in my life prior to postpartum anxiety. But I had a cousin who I was sharing my story, I think, with my mom or someone, and they told me about this cousin, and she wanted to have a conversation with me. And that was the first thing that she did was tell me about all the crazy thoughts that she had. And I was like, okay, and you're still here, and you haven't done that to your child. Okay, like I can get through this. And so if you can find someone who's had a similar experience to be your first person to tell, that usually takes some of that like just anxiety away about saying something, because it is pretty alarming if the first person you tell is, let's say, your husband or something, and he's never heard of intrusive thoughts either. And he's like, well, this woman might hurt my child. I've got to take this child away. And that's the worst feeling as a mom, is you tell someone and then they're like, yeah, you might actually be crazy. That's not what you're looking for. And so I would say if you're having intrusive thoughts or you're feeling just really not like yourself, you're not sure what's going on, speak to someone who's been through the experience or is a professional in the industry before sharing it with other people. Because there's a certain way that you may have to approach those conversations. It's not because you're dangerous, but it's because the individual that you're speaking to may not necessarily understand the experience. And when they don't understand, it gives them fear. And then that fear gives you more fear. And it just kind of breeds off of each other. So if you're feeling like, I do not know how to tell someone about this experience, I am always available. You can reach out to me. I've gone through it. I've heard the crazy thoughts. I've had the crazy thoughts. And I'm not going to look at you like you're a crazy person. I'm going to help you to see that this is a typical postpartum anxiety experience. It's not fun, but it is typical. And you're not someone who's experiencing this like totally alone or for the first time anyone's ever had these thoughts. That's not what it is. And the thing for me that was really scary is that I thought those thoughts meant that, like, okay, I might have psychosis or something of that nature. And it's actually not at all what it means. One of the things that brought me a lot of comfort is knowing that if you have postpartum psychosis, you're probably not going to know that you have it. And so if you are in your mind enough to be questioning these thoughts and to be really fearful of these thoughts, then it's highly unlikely that it is psychosis. I'm not going to say that like this is the ruling for all people, but it's just very unlikely that that's what it is. So find someone who you can talk to who has experience with it before just telling everyone, because I've made the mistake of telling someone who had no idea about postpartum issues, and they did make me feel like I was crazy. But then as soon as I told someone who knew what they were talking about, they're like, oh, that's totally normal. And I'm like, oh, okay. I feel a weight kind of lifted off of me. So if that's you, that's what you're feeling like, find someone to talk to who understands before going to other people.
Oh, I love it. And it's when you started talking about intrusive thoughts, it brought like tears to my eyes and chills on my body, because that is something that was so true of my experience with anxiety, and getting that feeling of like there's something wrong with me and like I'm dangerous because I'm fixating on this thought that I'm having, and I'm like obsessed with it and can't let it go. And now it's something that, you know, as I've learned, I saw someone post something about intrusive thoughts and gave some examples, and I was like, oh, hold up. This is something that's like a fairly common experience. And it actually is not like, it doesn't mean anything about me. It's just a thought. And I'm scared of it. And that, you know, that's what it is. And so being able to like have those conversations with other moms and being able to collectively realize like, okay, this is okay. This is okay. And it allows you to kind of separate and stop fixating, because you're like, okay, that's actually not as scary as I am thinking it is. And so just, I know the power that sharing about things like intrusive thoughts or those kind of experiences that can feel really scary, I know the power that sharing about that can have, because I mean, it changed my life, just somebody sharing about it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that's encouragement. Like if you're listening and you've gone through this experience, share it with someone. Even if you don't think that like it's going to benefit anyone in the moment, share that experience, because I guarantee there are people who are struggling and who will be thankful that you've said something. And that was my story. I didn't know if it was going to help anyone or if there was any purpose in me sharing it. But then as soon as I did, people are coming out of the woodworks that I haven't talked to since high school, some since middle school. And I'm like, what? This is just, it's wild. It blows my mind that none of them were talking about it. And I even went and like looked at their Facebook pages and like, why do you look like you're so happy then? Why do you look like there's nothing going on? And then here I am openly struggling, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, me too. So if you've gone through it and you're on the other side, share that journey of hope with someone because they need it. They need to know that it can get better.
Yeah, there's power in honesty and transparency, especially
Yeah.
when we are talking about these things that just historically have not been talked about in the way that brings that kind of collective
Yeah.
understanding. So it really is so powerful. I'd love to kind of zoom out to like the greater society. As somebody who is supporting mothers with mental health, what do you see as the barriers or issues with the way things currently are in terms of addressing maternal mental health?
Yeah. This is I feel like it's one of those things like this is a horse I'm willing to die on. But or a hill. Is it a horse or a hill?
I think a
I don't
hell.
know. A hill. I'll die on the horse on the hill because I'm so passionate about this. But I feel like the first step for everyone that I've spoken with who's shared with the doctor that they're struggling has been medication. And my story, and many moms' stories, is that medication was not necessarily the best approach. And there are so many approaches that have been scientifically proven to produce results that do not involve medication. So there's the practice of cognitive behavioral therapy that has been proven to be, I think it's like 80 to 88% effective, depending on which study you're looking at. There's the practice of utilizing food and supplements that has been proven to be extremely effective in treating and preventing postpartum mental health challenges. And so there are so many different things that we can move to first that we just neglect. And then there's also this huge aspect, I think, that we're getting better at, but just as a society, there's not enough education around it before you experience it. So I said so many times, like, if I just had known before I ever had my first intrusive thought that this is common in the postpartum period, I would have been able to like shoo it away, move on with my life. But because I had no idea, I treated it as something that was extremely important and that I needed to fixate on. And that became a bigger issue for me. So if we can do a better job on the front end when someone is maybe planning to get pregnant, to do a lot of these like educational workshops within like OB offices and all of those things, I think we can do a good job of getting ahead of the curve because there is this opportunity to prevent this before it ever happens. But once you're there, then it's really a matter of what's best for this individual mom versus, okay, let me give you a prescription for Zoloft. I would say about 80% of the women that I have worked with over the past four and some change years, that has been the first thing that their doctor has done is prescribe them Zoloft and then say, okay, now go see a psychiatrist. That's not super helpful, especially when you just send someone right out of your office and now they're still going home with the same issue, but now they have a prescription and they've got to manage the potential side effects of a prescription drug, and they still don't have any more support than they did when they walked in the door. And so I just feel like we're doing a huge injustice to moms by having medication be the first approach versus, okay, we've tried five or six things and now we can go to medication because that's not what worked for you. I could talk about this one all day. And I feel very, very strongly that we're just doing a huge disservice to moms and a lot of individuals struggling with mental health issues. We're doing a
Mm-hmm.
huge disservice to them, pretending as if we throw a pill at it and then things are going to get better. There's so much work that has to be done under the surface. And if we don't deal with that, then medication can become more of a band-aid than an actual solution. And that's not what anyone is looking for. I'm sure that's not even what the doctors want either. It's not like there's malicious intent. It's just that that's what's been done. And so we just continue with the status quo versus challenging the status quo, which is what I feel like I'm here to do, is to challenge this notion that medication is the solution. I truly don't believe there's one solution for all moms. It's just we're all so different. How is it possible to have one solution? And just challenging people to think differently. There's another way. And that's what I was looking for, the other way. And I had to search hours and hours and hours. It should not be that way.
Mm-hmm.
It should be just as in front of your face as medication is, that there's a holistic and natural route that has proven to heal over long term. So I'll end there with my horse and my hill.
Well, you're speaking to these systematic lacks that we have that I know for me, when I finally got up the courage to call my doctor, fortunately, I had done research and like I kind of knew more about how I wanted to approach it because it wasn't just like I failed a screening and then, we move forward and whatever. But I was on anxiety medication and have been on and off since experiencing postpartum anxiety for the first time, but also like in tangent with therapy and to get a therapist that was then covered by insurance and just all these things that I had to advocate for. And it's just not easy. And I don't even know, it's like the doctors don't even have the resources to send you to because the system is just so not set up to support mothers and their mental health. So it's really exciting to see somebody who is stepping into that and saying, but these options do exist. And so we can become kind of the pieces of the system to make the difference. And it's really incredible to see. And I think the work you're doing is so amazing and world changing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting that like you say, even you don't feel like your doctor necessarily had the resources. I too felt the same way. It was like, he didn't even tell me what psychiatrist to see. There wasn't like a recommendation list of like, maybe call these couple of psychiatrists. I've worked with them
Mm-hmm.
before. And it was just like, here's the medication. Now go see a psychiatrist. And I had to do the legwork of finding a psychiatrist. I had to find one that was covered by my insurance. Then I had to get on a wait list to wait for an appointment for several months. And so in the meantime, I still had to keep seeing my OB to keep prescribing me the Zoloft because I couldn't get in with a psychiatrist for several months.
Yeah,
And so there's just like
you
this,
need some solution and you don't have the options for solutions. And then
yeah,
if you don't have the support to support you in making those calls because you're dealing with all this other stuff,
mm-hmm,
including not sleeping enough and having your baby all the time, it's hard to make a call. And if you have support, amazing, but a lot of people don't have support in doing that. And it gets us trapped in this cycle that is
yeah.
feels impossible because it in some ways kind of is. And so like offering that support, being that support is so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even as you were saying, like there's a challenge of calling the doctor, then there's like this lack of motivation. You're just like,
Yeah.
I have to call another place and see if they accept my insurance and where's my insurance card and like all of these different things. Whereas if the doctor is your doctor, they have your insurance. And if they have a list of resources, they can tell you which ones accept your insurance. Maybe they can even put in a call for you and say, like, hey, Emily's going to be calling. She's given me permission to share her insurance information. I've got it all set up for you. And have this really streamlined, smooth process. But that's not what exists. And even the same for therapists. I mean, it was recommended that I see a therapist. Which one? How do I find one? How do I know who's the best therapist for me? How do I know if they've specifically dealt with women who have struggled through postpartum depression? I had to do all the research on my own. And like I said, it was hours upon hours of research. And thankfully, I was motivated enough to do it. But there are so many women who don't do that extra work because they just don't feel like they have it in them to do it. I think the statistic was something like 60% of women who have postpartum depression do not get some sort of like treatment for it. There's a number of reasons why, but I'm sure a large part of that is all of the work that's entailed to actually get that treatment that you need and then finding the person. Like it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. And we can make these like baby steps towards a better
Yeah.
way. And I could talk to you for hours about this. I'm sure that you're such a wealth of knowledge in this. And it's something that I'm so passionate about exploring. So I really appreciate you sharing. Before we wrap up the conversation, I am a huge proponent of self-care and really normalizing taking care of ourselves as moms. And so I really love asking guests, how do you take care of yourself? And do you have any tips for moms to take care of themselves, make sure they're getting that self-care in?
Yeah, I love that question. So I have for a while now done baths on Wednesdays. It's just my thing. I like to take a bath on Wednesdays. Usually we'll soak with some Epsom salt. I'll have a good book, or maybe there's a documentary that I want to watch or something. I literally have a whole setup. in my tub because that's my thing. But on those weeks when it's harder to get to like that day where I get a couple of hours alone, I like to think of it as like self-care moments. So it doesn't have to be something big or extreme. It doesn't even have to cost you a dime to do, but you can find little things that lift you up. For me, I like to do meditation. There's an app called Abide, and I just go into the app. I'll find a meditation. You can find one from like 5 minutes all the way up to like 30 or so minutes, depending on how much time you have. So if you can just lock yourself in a closet for like 5 minutes, that could be your self-care moment where you're just doing this deep breathing. You're hearing, for me, it's scripture read over me, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be okay. For some people, it's affirmations. Whatever it looks like, it doesn't have to be something huge. It could be a really small thing. And so this is something that I actually talk through with my clients a lot. It's like we look at self-care and we're like, oh, I've got to go get my nails done and get my hair done and go buy this expensive bag. Like, I don't have time to do all of those things quite often. And so I have to find the little moments, just the little pockets of time where I can do one thing that lifts me up. For me, tea is a big one. I like to make a really good tea, and then I like the whole process of steeping it because I do loose leaf tea. And then I'll just drink it. I have mine today out of this large mug that says best dad ever. But that's just, it's a little experience for me. Like, this is self-care for me. And so it'll look different, but find those little things that you just feel like, okay, that was a moment of peace for me. And so I have so many of them that I've now gotten used to doing.
I love it. I love just like the kind of romanticizing of the little activities, the making the tea and letting that be an experience in itself. And then also having those bigger spaces to kind of let yourself be, but just kind of the approach of doing all of that is awesome.
Yeah.
Arielle, I have like just loved this conversation. So grateful for you being here. Would you mind telling listeners where they can find you and if there's anything they should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, absolutely. So by the time this episode will come out, my coaching program will be opened again. So we're opening in October, and I take one-on-one coaching with clients. So that is an option where I've talked about it throughout this episode, but we would walk through that entire process together over the course of 12 weeks. And then I also do quarterly workshops. So the next one at this point, so this is October, it would be in December, would be our next quarterly workshop. We have an expert come on. So we just had a therapist come on for one episode and talk us through cognitive behavioral therapy. We have sleep experts who come on and talk us through not only sleep for ourselves, but for our babies. And so you can join us for one of those workshops where you get to be in community with other moms and see that you are truly not alone. You're far from alone in this journey. And then you can just follow me on Instagram or on Facebook or even the podcast, which everything is Arielle Wozniak. So it's super easy to find me. I feel like I'm the only Arielle Wozniak.
It's convenient.
But just, it is convenient. But it's just ArielleWozniak. And that's my website. That's my Instagram. That's my Facebook. All the places you can find me.
Amazing. And I will make sure to link it all in the show notes as well so that it is nice and easy for you. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah. I'm so grateful for this conversation.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure.
And thank you for being here and tuning in. If you would like to do just a little something to recognize World Mental Health Day, sharing this conversation could be a powerful way to do just that, because when we are exposing others to these conversations, whether you're just sending it to another mom in your life or sharing it on your Instagram, we are normalizing conversations about mental health. And that is really a huge step towards making change for individuals and for just the world at large and how we experience and treat mental health. So that is it for today. I will see you next week. You are worthy, Mama.